Welcome back into the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. Joey Van Zummeren joined, as always, by Michael Stamps here to recap week 2 of fall camp for the Missouri Tigers, week of practices and 2 scrimmages where we have learned quite a bit about this team. Still no real answers to big position battles, although I will say that Eli Drinkwitz gave us quite a strong hint at one of those that we've been talking about. We also heard from him on some freshmen to expecting some playing time, some surprising names thrown in there. So excited to talk about it all today. Michael, just what have been your thoughts on this week too, and especially from Drinkwitz after the scrimmage?
Feels like we're doing like All Things Mizzou podcast after dark. It's 10:20 here on Saturday. I was really intrigued by a lot of the stuff he said, especially with some of the freshmen. He threw out the names like Donovan Alubade and Marquise Davis, but some of those guys, I'm not going to say their name just for the sake of surprise. But those were names that certainly had me a little bit surprised as well in a positive way. Because they're positions of need, I feel like, and you can never have too much depth. But yeah, definitely a lot of revealing stuff. My intake of what's going on basically comes from you, Joey, since I'm back in Nebraska for the rest of the week. So um, I guess that's that. But no, I was really intrigued with a lot of the stuff he said following today's today's availability, following today's practice. Definitely a lot to break down. Probably, I mean, he said some things at the end of week 1, and I guess there were things we could talk about. But this is really the first time this off season where it seems like we have things we can actually grasp onto and start to sort out. So I guess that's exciting in itself.
Right, absolutely. Michael back in Nebraska, and I'm still boots on the ground here in Columbia throughout the rest of fall camp. So there is certainly a lot to discuss and make and hypothesize of what Drinkwitz had to say today. I mean, let's start off with the obvious one with the quarterbacks. And there's no news here. I mean, the big thing being that there's still no separation, according to Drinkwitz. And like we talked about last week, at least from what we're able to see, that tracks from both Bo and Sam's performance. Obviously, there's a lot larger sample size of it for Drinkwitz to actually watch. But again, like we talked about last week, the main thing for this is really not who is making the best highlight plays, who is putting together the best highlight reel. Rather, it is who can string together a good 30 passes, who can be a good player in a game. Because really, the talent of Bo Prabula and Sam Horn is on tape. You can watch that. You can watch that in high school just like you can with any freshman that we're going to talk about today. But how are they going to actually play in a game? And even with Bo Prabula, who has playing time, he had filled in really well for Drew Eller against Wisconsin in that last game. But outside of his running role, how is he going to be able to consistently produce? And that's just the name of the game for this quarterback right now. So any thoughts on the no updates on the quarterback battle, Michael?
No, like you said, it tracks. I think one important thing outside of consistency and being able to string together plays is turnovers. Seems like that might have been an issue so far. He said that there were no turnovers in this most recent scrimmage, so I suppose that's a positive. I feel like it's important to talk about that. The fact that there isn't any separation yet might not be a bad thing. I mean, yeah, not one player has stood out above and beyond. So I guess that's in itself could be viewed as a negative, but it seems like they're both doing a lot of good things, and it's still early to expect them to be, mistake free or even anywhere close to mistake free or ready to, play at the beginning of the season. So I don't think the fact that there isn't any, lot or any separation at all is necessarily a bad thing. It's not a great thing. I mean, there's definitely I would put it in the middle ground, but it's not exactly a super large negative that neither player has separated themselves, because it seems like they're going back and forth and competing pretty well. So I guess just the fact that it's not maybe the worst thing in the world, and then the no turnovers of the scrimmage today has got to be a good thing, even if they're not making huge chunk plays. The fact that they're able to make good enough decisions to keep the ball in the defense's hands has to be a positive.
Right, absolutely. Like you said, I saw some fans react to this negatively, especially when Drinkwitz did the interview with Oklahoma radio, weirdly enough, a few days ago, talking using that same quote of taking that as a negative. But I really don't think it is. I don't think it. I don't think he means by that both have been bad. So, and as far as we know, he said that both have been good. Let's move around here. I originally had running backs as our second position, but let's talk about wide receivers first because I want to talk about something interesting first. So first off, what I would say, as we have been saying all the offseason, and I feel even more confident about now, I feel certain that Donovan Olubade is going to get playing time and a good amount of it. It's not going to be just like even the role Marquise Johnson had his freshman year where he was brought in a few times to go fast. I think they are really going to work Donovan into this offense. We've talked about him quite a bit. And really, I think I wouldn't necessarily have labeled it as a competition at the start of fall camp, but I think one of the guys out of Donovan Olubade, James Madison, Daniel Blood, and Xavier Lloyd, one of those guys was going to have to stand out to be the guy behind those top three of Marquise, Joshua, and Coleman. And so it really seems like Donovan is that guy. Drinkwitz mentioned that Daniel Blood has been struggling with, or he struggled with drops in this most recent practice, but has been more consistent throughout other times at camp. Xavier Lloyd is also a guy he mentioned last week when talking about which of the receivers have been the most reliable, and he said that Xavier Lloyd has been doing just a good job and it's been consistent. But Olubade has the flashes, has impressive catches almost every day that we get to see him, and really making a name for himself. So, Michael, what role do you think Donovan can earn himself this year?
Exactly what you said, and there's no such thing as too much wide receiver depth, because it's a position where there truly is such a like. There's so many things that a wide receiver can be good at that one guy might not have, and he seems like he kind of has a blend of everything you look for: size, speed. But I mean, his hands seem to be impressive. I think last week when Drinkwitz was talking about things that some freshmen needed to improve on. I believe it was getting open and staying open for Donovan. So I guess we don't technically know um, if that did improve, but it kind of seems like Drinkwitz talks about Donovan in the same regard as guys like Marquise, Josh, and Kevin. So we don't want to assume anything, obviously, and I obviously too freshmen have a larger mountain to climb, I guess, when it comes to getting playing time, just because they have to adapt to the speed of the game. But it seems like he's pretty highly regarded. So I mean, just because we hear his name in these media availabilities doesn't mean he's gonna break out and be a star. So probably worth making that clear. But from what we have seen in these flashes of practice, he seems to be an impressive player. So I agree. I think it's looking likely right now that he emerges um, as a guy who is kind of that fourth receiver. It's also worth noting, like Xavier Lloyd. I don't know how much eligibility he has left, but he's on the older side. Daniel Blood's on the older side. So when you're looking at those guys, and James Madison as well, I suppose. But I mean, Donovan obviously has multiple years in front of him, and if his freshman year pans out, you might be looking at a guy that's the future of the wide receiver room. So for that reason as well, throwing him into the fire a little bit and uh, allowing him to make plays, but also allowing him to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, so we can continue to improve, probably isn't the worst thing in the world.
Well, let's keep things interesting on the offense side of the ball and move along to the offensive line. Connor Tolson was out of the second scrimmage, just a veteran rest move. I thought one interesting thing to hear that he mentioned was like Keaton Jones, true freshman, stood out there. Um, Michael, freshman, where along the line does Keaton project?
Um, I would say more than likely guard, but also when I was in Columbia, would have been on Sunday. I also saw him uh, snapping the ball at center.
Right, that's
So
true.
I guess that's a possibility. Now, granted, that was like Connor was out, and it was Tristan, Henry Fanuku, and then Keaton Jones. So throw Connor into the mix, and Keaton's probably like the fourth center. So I doubt that's really the case. I would say more than likely guard would be his natural position. I believe he was ranked in high school as an interior lineman. So I would say one of the two guard positions. Not sure which side though.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. So Keaton Jones stood out in this second scrimmage, and then also with Connor Tolleson being out, Drinkwitz did mention that this introduced a quote unquote whole other lineup, which I thought was interesting. We've talked about before, I believe, on the show, or at least I've wrote about it. What the second center could be, even though Tristan Wilson takes the reps behind Connor, at least when they're snapping the ball. I really think if Connor Tolson were to go down, it'd be Dominic Giudice that would slide over. We recently heard Dominic explain how to pronounce his last name, and I'm not 100% sure I still got it right, but Giudice, I believe, is what it is. I think Dominic would slide over to the center spot instead of bringing Tristan Wilson in. Although they have been complimentary of the development that Tristan has made, so certainly a guy to watch there for the future for sure. And then at guard, you'd have Jalen Early, which, speaking of Jalen Early and everything that's going on guard there, Drinkwitz had mentioned that next week they're going to change things up along the offensive line, try a different starting five to see what it looks like. Now, I really don't see I wouldn't see the purpose in switching around anybody besides left tackle and right guard, just be those are the two positions you aren't 100% certain on, specific, especially left tackle. But maybe, even though Keegan Tross has been named the winner in the spring, maybe they try out somebody else there. Although I really think their second right tackle would just be one of Johnny Williams or Javen Richardson, anyways. But I'm interested to see what that looks like. I think the two replacements there at left tackle and right guard, obviously Johnny Williams, Jalen Early, and then and just see how those two guys do. But is there any other combinations that come to mind or anything you're interested to see there?
I mean, I kind of agree with you in the sense where I don't know. I mean, outside of just seeing where some of the depth guys are at, I don't know if I fully see the purpose outside of really even left tackle. Honestly, as the days go on and, you know, Drinkwitz and players continue to talk, I think I'm growing increasingly confident in. I just looked up the pronunciation. I think it's Dominic Judice. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I'm going more increasingly confident that I think Dominic is going to be the guy at right guard. So I guess try out Jalen Early because he does. It's a tough thing to do because I feel like Jalen Early is certainly a talented enough player to probably start on this offensive line. Um, but I think the years of leadership and experience from Dominic just give him the edge there. And the more people talk, the more confident I become that I think he's going to be the more than likely permanent starter. But I guess outside of just testing some of the depth and resting Connor as well, I don't know if I fully see the benefit in it. But again, I mean, I feel like the possibilities outside of those guys and the groups are really ones we've discussed where whoever I don't know who you put at left tackle outside of Javen and Johnny, you can pick or choose one of those two. Tristan, Jalen. I mean, I don't know who it is outside of that really. So it seems like they're all possibilities and combinations that we've really discussed. Unless you want to give some of those freshmen a run and rest Caden Green, I don't know. Or you want to try Henry Fanuku at center instead of Tristan or Dominic. So I guess that's a possibility. But again, I'm not a coach, so I'm not gonna like go out on a limb here. But I feel like we kind of know the combinations already, so I don't know if I fully understand it. But again, I guess there's no harm in testing out some of the depth of these guys and resting a dude like Connor, who is old and recovering. So
Yeah, I mean, I think especially at left tackle and right guard, it's at least because I mean, even Dominic is an experience, even for how long he's been around. Um, I mean, all four of Javen, Johnny, Jalen, Dominic are all in some sense inexperienced. Some of them have a little bit more than others. Jalen probably has more. Well, he probably started just around the same amount of games as Dominic last year. Um, and a little more versatile. Maybe they try out Jalen at left tackle. Who knows? They started training him at right guard going into the fall, but maybe they want to try him out at tackle. Who knows there? I mean, even just to see as another backup. But yeah, I mean, I think really Drinkwitz emphasized just finding the best combination, not as much a individual thing of we want this guy here, but really what's the best combination of this, trying out different groups, trying out how different people work together and see how that plays out.
I think it also might be worth, I guess, taking back my statement a little bit, like finding some of these players' natural position couldn't hurt too. You have guys like Henry Fanuku who played, uh, I mean, he played tackle guard and center in high school and looks like he's slotted to play guard or center now, but find his natural position, find Keaton Jones' natural position. And you mentioned Jalen early. He played like every position outside of center for Florida State, or maybe like not left, not one of the tackles or not one of the guards, but he's played at multiple spots, like 3 or 4 spots in the offensive line. So find where he's more, most comfortable, and prep him to be with the twos for maybe it's right tackle or right guard or whatever it is. So I guess there. I'll take back what I said a little bit. There would be some benefit in finding some of these guys' true positions. I mean, same things with some of the ones we don't hear about, like Brandon Solis. He's been mentioned. I guess find where he truly fits in the best. Logan Reichert as well. Find where he fits in the best. So I guess it could be a good opportunity to find some of these dudes' natural positions that are kind of viewed as like tweener, multi-position guys. And that's nice versatility to have. And I don't think that's something that needs to change, but having somewhere they can specialize probably wouldn't be a bad idea, especially for Jalen Early, a guy who played, has consistently played different positions throughout his career. So that could be of benefit.
Right. And I would say with Dominic, to your point there of being confident in him having that job locked down, it was confusing. And I think we talked about it after SEC Media Days because it seemed like Drinkwitz kind of declared him the starter there outright guard to start things off. And then there was some confusion on that. There are a few of our fellow beat reporters here were questioning, like, did he really mean, because they all of us had kind of assumed Dominic was going to be the starting right guard, and he's been taking all those starting reps. It's kind of assume like then started questioning though, like, what did he really mean? That was it as much of a declaration as it was for Trost in the spring, and then of course when you ask Drink about it in a press like, hey, does Dominic have a job? Obviously, the motto of fall camp is that nobody's job is secure. So, no clear, great answer on that, but I would definitely say the right guard competition is less of one than the one at left tackle. I feel confident in saying that at least. Okay, and then to round things out with running back and tight end, there's really nothing necessarily new here, but just kind of, again, things that we've talked about before improving to be true as we go on through fall camp. Marquise Davis, a true freshman running back, had a good scrimmage. He's still in the number 77, but seemed like he had a rough first week of fall camp just from the way that Drinkwitz was talking about it. Having to go from number 7 to 77 as punishment. But now Drinkwitz says he's playing too good in that number 77. And then at tight end, both Brett Northlead and Jude James had good catches in this past scrimmage. Nothing surprising there. Both those guys, no doubt, in their receiving ability. With Jude, just a matter of what can he block well enough to get himself on the field. So again, nothing necessarily new to add there, but any thoughts on those two performances, Michael?
Just add it to the tally of episodes where we've mentioned or talked about Jude James. Seems like it's every episode or every other. I mean, I guess we really have. I don't know if we fully discussed. I mean, the tight end depth is pretty interesting, and I don't think there's a clear. I mean, if we're doing the whole nobody's job is safe thing, I don't think there's a clear, um, number. I mean, I don't even want to say there's a clear number two. I mean, Jordan Harris, you'd think he's earned it, but someone could step up. Jude could step up. I mean, uh, Vince Brown's obviously experienced, and Gavin Hoffman as well. So there's um, a few guys behind Brett Norfleet who are definitely talented enough to earn snaps. And outside of Eli Drinkwitz saying that he wants to get them more involved in the receiving game, I think that could indicate opportunities for guys, for a guy like Jude James, who that's really his bread and butter. You mentioned the blocking. I think we also saw Jordan Harris step up in that department as well. I feel like we don't exactly know a ton about Vince Brown yet either, but there are plenty of dudes in that room who are capable of playing. So that honestly, not that it's a position battle, I don't want to say that, but I feel like that depth is kind of a mystery.
Yeah.
Definitely kind of a mystery right now. And then yeah, Marquise Davis, it's nice to hear he's bouncing back from that as well.
Right. Yeah. With tight ends, we've talked about it in the offseason, but just interested to see what that rotation ends up looking like. Obviously, Brett is going to be in there a lot. Um, but I think, Vince Brown, he's been high up there in the blocking drills. I think number 2 or 3 right behind Jordan, and then lower in the receiving drills, but still, he's definitely not at the bottom of those either. They like his experience for sure. But with Jude James, I think, and I talked about this or wrote about this before too. When I talked to tight ends coach Sherm Cato, talked about him at H-back, which is basically a modernized fullback, lining up a lot of times in the backfield, but then also a lot going out a lot as a blocker, but then also as a receiver. Luke Fickell did this really well in his time at Cincinnati, specifically with a guy named Josiah DeGuara. And Josiah was a pretty good receiver. He's not going to go out there and run some super complex route, but it's a lot of stuff out of the backfield. And specifically with the way the Missouri's wide zone run offense works, I think rollouts with Jude James out of the backfield could be really fun. Have him go out there on a chip block and then go out there for a pass with his receiving ability. Even if he can't, and I don't know the technicalities enough of tight end blocking, I would feel like even if he isn't fully developed as being able to hold his own in run blocking, I think chip somebody, really just go out there and knock some wind into somebody and then go out there for a pass. I think he could be capable of. So I think that's an interesting role to watch him for. And we saw they use it. Sorry, I just want to say one more thing on the H-back. With Brett Norfleet, they had Brett line up as the H-back a few times last year. It definitely seemed like it was more than they ever did in 2023. So that's that.
Yeah, I don't have any issues saying that Jude James is the second best receiver in that room. So I think whatever role it is, whether it's the H-back or lines up in his natural position, I think this is going to be the season for sure where they're going to have to get him on the field just for various opportunities. And he's a pretty unique, I feel like, unique tight end. We've talked about his size, and he's bulked up, at his time here, but he's definitely not the size of a natural modern tight end. He's still a little undersized, but that obviously allows for other things after the catch that adds a pretty interesting dynamic part to his game. So I think we're probably getting to the point where they're gonna they're gonna have to carve out some sort of role for him. Especially again, we've heard Drinkwitz say this 2 or 3 times now that they're going to make an effort to get the tight ends more involved in the receiving game, and it's kind of hard to not view Jude James as a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, switching things over to the defensive side of things. A lot of interesting things going on this side of the ball. Again, a lot more freshmen going on here. So first off, what I want to talk about off the top, though, is that Drinkwitz had said, I'd asked him about the cornerback 2 spot and had said, because he kind of wasn't too, I wouldn't say decisive, but wasn't too hard on we need to find out who's going to be our second boundary corner besides Drayden Norwood. Um, he's called it a competition throughout fall camp, but it seems like it might be more so one of who's going to get the 70 versus who's going to get the 30 of those snaps. And so with that cornerback competition specifically, we'll get to this a little later on to talk more in depth, but he only mentioned Toriano Pride there and Stephen Hall, not Nick DeLoach, which I thought was interesting. But with this, he said, they want to be too deep on defense. And he said this last year of they not viewing it as first string and backups specifically on defense because there is a lot more opportunity for rotation. I forget the exact word he used, but there's a lot of guys that aren't starters that are going to have significant roles. And so he had said that right now he's confident in 18 players on defense. Ideally, it'd be 20 or 25 or 20 or 25. Well, I thought the fact that he said 18 players was a specific number. So I wanted to crack out who are these 18 players? Because I think it's interesting about specifically some transfers that we're unsure of exactly where they fit in. So this is a list I came up with here for the 18. So at edge rusher, Damon Wilson, Zion Young, Nate Johnson, Darius Smith. At defensive tackle, Chris McClellan, Sterling Webb, Marquise Graciel. Linebacker, Tristan Newson, Khalil Jacobs, Nick Rodriguez, Josiah Trotter. At corner, Norwood, Pride Hall. And at safety, Carnell, Catalan, and Marvin Burks. And then for that final spot, I was undecided between Nick DeLoach and Braylon Henderson. I would say it probably leans more toward DeLoach just because he saw 50% of the defense back snaps through the last half of the season there, but Henderson does have experience too. Is there any, just looking at that list, is there any that, do you think I got that list right, Michael?
Yeah, I don't know who you would substitute out, but it seems like Mose Phillips is a guy that they're pretty confident in at the safety position. It's really only been positives, from Coach Drinkwitz. And when I talked to safeties coach Jacob Yoro a couple of weekends ago, he also shared that same sentiment of positivity that he's already making an impact early on in fall camp. So I don't know. Yeah, you've got the chunk of guys right. I think I would, if you could throw another question mark on Mose Phillips, I would do the same thing. I think he certainly has a claim there. But I don't know. Brennan Henderson's not a guy we've seen a ton from yet. We know what Nick DeLoach is or could be capable of for the most part, and then not necessarily too informed on Mose Phillips yet, but is getting some high reviews. And he also has a good chunk of experience at the Power 5 level, which makes a difference. Nothing against Braylon Henderson, but Ohio and the MAC is not Virginia Tech or the SEC. That was a statement. I would throw Mose Phillips in that conversation. I'm really excited to talk about some of the other candidates we have here, though.
Yeah, so let's get to talking about some guys who could get into there, because if they're at 18 right now, who are going to be the next 7 to fill out that possible 25? I don't know if they'll quite get there, but I think depending on the week, they'll get close. So first off, along the defensive line, 2 names I did not expect Drinkwitz to mention today. Although this is to say, when you stand out on the second and third team, it's a lot different than standing out on the first team. But talk about Justin Bodford, the redshirt freshman from St. Thomas Aquinas, and then Jason Dow, the true freshman from Althoff in the St. Louis area, and said that Jason Dow could contribute to the starting room, which, Michael, what are your thoughts on how this defensive line rotation is seeming to shaken up, and your thoughts on Dow and Bodford specifically?
I remember Bodford's a pretty big body, but we haven't seen any of him yet. Jason Dowell is a pretty incredible athlete, and I do remember that he was a heck of a wrestler in high school, so he has a little bit of a bend and pass rush ability to him, but also just a smart player. I mean, these are not guys we were likely expecting to hear about this season. So it definitely throws a wrench in that. Um, I wonder if he's just like throwing out names. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but I struggle a little bit when you have five experienced guys in McClellan, Webb, Grousfield, Henderson, and Jalen Marshall, um, and Sam Williams' name hasn't even been said. I struggle to like see a universe where they really can contribute, but I guess it's not completely impossible. I don't know. Jason Dowell is a talented kid, and Justin Bodford is as well. I think Dowell would probably see the field before Bodford would. I think he's a smart player and has a lot of really good athletic tools. Probably still needs to bulk up a little bit, but really good athlete. So that would go a long way. But yeah, I don't want to read too much into that one because saying he could contribute could mean a million different things.
Right.
And it seems like that I mentioned earlier in the episode, it's an uphill battle for freshmen. Even if it, and I guess I don't want to, maybe I'll retract myself a little bit because there is a lot of questions about this group's depth as well. And, you know, you could argue that nothing is solidified outside of Chris McClellan. I mean, Sterling Webb's going to play and Marquise Gracefield's going to play, but uh, and what order and how many snaps and all that stuff, and is there really a true number two? But yeah, I don't know. I don't want to read too much into it because I think it's going to be hard for some of those guys to see the field.
Yeah, I think that definitely could be true of just maybe they had surprising performances that made them stick out and be more prominent. But hey, I mean, maybe they definitely have to leapfrog. They have to leapfrog Jalen Marshall. They have to leapfrog Sam Williams um, to get in. But I mean, like they want 5-6 deep that defensive tackle. But again, for both those guys, I think it really is the case here. Well, they also have to leapfrog Braylon Henderson. Like you really have to make an argument of like why you should play and not just like they need one of these guys to step up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's also worth saying like injuries happen all the time, so having eight guys who can play in the defensive tackle room might not be the worst thing in the world. But they're also young, so if they're starting to stand out now, and they don't want to transfer after this season, which is obviously so far in the future. I don't want to speculate or get too far into that. It's literally impossible to predict. But uh, I mean, if they do end up staying, I mean, you might have some reliable contributors here in the future, which is also positive. Knowing that if the coaching staff thinks they're good enough to contribute right now, or if they've shown flashes of being able to contribute right now, it's going to be a good sign for the future. But yeah, I don't want to read too much into it.
Right, and let's talk about linebackers here, off-ball linebackers. Then, so another true freshman you mentioned here was Dante McClellan, a guy you said again could contribute. I mean, just since you're recruiting writer, I mean, what are your thoughts on Dante? I mean, even past the depth chart, just like of what he brings here.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had to pinpoint or pick out another guy out between him and Jason King of the true freshmen, it would be Dante. I think he's a really sound tackler and is athletic enough to drop back in coverage. So two pretty impactful things. Was one of those players where I was kind of interested um, as to like how the speed of the game would catch up with him. I think he is probably in a little bit of a similar position as Nick Rodriguez was at the beginning of last season, where we maybe heard his name a time or two and didn't expect to see him a lot. But injuries happened, and Nick Rodriguez took advantage of his opportunity. So I think there's definitely a world where that happens with Dante McClellan. He's going to have to jump ahead of Jeremiah Beasley and then everyone else that we've been talking about all off season long. So another uphill battle, but I it's definitely a different situation from the defensive tackles. There's a lot of natural talent with McClellan, and a lot that says that he could excuse me, a lot that says that he could play early. So it wouldn't be the end. I mean, you don't want to hope for injuries, but once he gets used to everything and gets months of practice under him by the end of the season, and if he is thrust into the lineup, I don't think that would be the end of the world. He seems like the guy who could probably handle it.
Right. I mean, I was thinking about the depth at Mike linebacker because at will it's pretty clear Tristan Cleo and Nick Rodriguez, which is heck of a group, heck of the three players. So interested to see what the playing time looks like there, especially because they weren't expecting Tristan Newsom to be in the fold. But at Mike, it's obviously Josiah Trotter and then Jeremiah Beasley. But I mean, Jeremiah like interested. He's definitely more unproven than Nick Rodriguez, just based off the opportunities they got last year. So, like Dante probably has to get over Jeremiah Beasley, but that at Mike it's definitely thinner than Will, at least as far as proven production goes. And then on to edge rushers. We've talked a lot about Javon Hilson, but Dayton Hopkins was apparently in the backfield all day from Drinkwitz, and Drinkwitz said could very well play himself into a role. We've talked so much about Javion. He's been the highlight of the freshmen in this group. But Michael, I mean, what are your thoughts on Dayton standing out there?
Dayton's such a unique player. It's honestly pretty cool. Not a guy that I was expecting to hear, but I mean, he was a 4-star recruit and uh, had a heck of a senior season and high school career. So he's productive. He's 6'6", 237. So he has since bulked up. I don't want to be wrong on this. You can maybe fact check me, Joey, but he was around 200 pounds, I believe, coming out of high school.
Sounds
Um,
right.
yeah, he was very visibly thin. I mean, you can even go look on some social media and see some of the posts. And I even we saw him when we saw him that first Sunday for media day. I think he looked noticeably bigger, and I had to ask someone, "Is that Dayton Hopkins?" So that's always a good sign. He already has more of a SEC or I mean Division 1 football build, which is good because he's so tall and has. I would love to know his wingspan. A ridiculous, incredible wingspan. I'm sure he played basketball. But yeah, I mean, his body's already matured pretty early into the offseason, which is a really good sign. So maybe it shouldn't be a complete surprise, but this is not definitely not the freshman defensive end we were expecting to hear. And it sounds like he did more than just make a play or two. Um, and he was a great pass rusher in high school. He uses his size, his height. He's 6'6". That's pretty tall. Uses his long arms to his advantage to get past tackles and get to the quarterback. So I think one fun thing about edge rushers is it is a position where I think that natural talent and athleticism really shows up the most. And there is a lot of refinement that can happen, but you can't win solely with athleticism and your physical profile, but you can on occasion. And I think this might be the case for Dayton Hopkins, where he's still refining himself as a player. But in the meantime, I think he has some pretty incredible athletic tools that will allow him to showcase that a little bit and make a bit of an impact. So, I mean, I feel like it's a safe opinion to say that the defensive ends are one of, if not the best position group on the entire team. And we weren't even discussing Dayton Hopkins in the conversation. I mean, I recorded my defensive end preview for our YouTube channel sometime either earlier this week or last week, and I think I mentioned Dayton the same tier as Langdon Kitchen, which maybe that's still the case, but I think now it just throws another wrench in the depth there, and he does things different than the guys at the top of the depth chart. Maybe more similar profile wise to Darius Smith than anyone else on the team, but yeah, I mean it just throws another wrench in an already deep room, and again, you can never have enough talent. So this is really probably one of the biggest positive takeaways that we heard from Drinkwitz today. It's exciting stuff.
Yeah, and I will say he did mention Hilson too as that stood out in the scrimmage. But I think with edge rusher, it is interesting with the depth because I mean, once you get to Hopkins, it's like, man, like how many guys are you taking off the field for Damon Wilson and Zion Young? But when I talked to Brian Early, the edge coach, a few weeks ago, he had talked about that they weren't happy with the depth they had there last year, which I thought, which I can see wanting to improve on that. Obviously, you can always improve on it. Well, I thought last year, I mean, you have Eddie Ketty, Ja'Kai Lane, as your two top backups, and they rotated in often. Thought they were solid there. I mean, they had William Swinneri, who they didn't find a use for him. Maybe that's just because he wasn't developed or where they wanted him to be at. But wasn't happy with the depth there last year, and they feel like a much better place right now as far as keeping guys fresh. Like, can definitely see how that be a position where you need that. But then also, as we've talked about so many times with this group, of just how versatile it is. So, I mean, interested to see. I think Landon Kitchen is definitely a big question. I think it's hard to like say he won't see a role at all just because of his build. I think he can be a good run defender. He's a lot more stocky than the other guys. He's more of a traditional 3-4 defensive end than a 4-3 edge rusher. So interested to see what his role looks like. But yeah, I mean, we talked about the four guys at the top, but then where does Landon Kitchen fit in? Is he getting opportunities outside of obvious rundowns? And then after that, I mean, yeah, I mean, Hopkins and Hilson can definitely step up in there.
I did not know that Brian Early told you that he wasn't happy with the depth last season. That's a bold claim. I think you could probably make the argument that it was one of the best deepest position groups on the roster last year. But I think it's also safe to say that it's probably upgraded, which is really, I mean, even with people leaving at running back and quarterback and wide receiver and all these impactful positions, the fact that the defensive end room is the one that they managed to maybe do the best overhaul and reload in is impressive. So that's interesting that he said that, but
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, last year's edge room was like the all potential team. Like, I mean, they had production for sure, but I mean, Ja'Kai Lane, William Swinneri, and Jaylen Brown, I would not be surprised if all three of those guys go on to have really good careers. On to the defense backs, which we talked a little bit about at the top here. Most Phillips, a guy at safety that had some big plays in the scrimmage. We've seen him, the presumption at least that he would slot into that star role that Dalen Cornell plays. Interested to see if they, try him out and maybe free safety too to get some playing time. But then with the cornerbacks, like I said, it's Hall and Pride, at least from the way Drinkwitz phrased it today, and he's pretty much fine with both those guys rotating consistently. So, I mean, we've talked about this cornerback battle before. Stephen Hall has a good amount of experience, albeit not at anywhere close to the SEC level. I believe last year with Washington was his first producing at the Division I FBS level. But has experience. Toriano needs to improve from last year, and that was clear. So, yeah, that's what's going on with cornerback 2 and kind of the only other the true position battle on this roster. Any thoughts on any of the defense backs as we get going here?
I mean, I guess I want to say Nick DeLoach is the odd man out. That's probably unfair to him because he's still going to play a decent amount. But it's not surprising that he is viewed as, being beneath Hall of Pride simply for the same reason you said. It's just it's an experience thing. But I think it's also going to be good because, kind of what I said with whatever freshman I was talking about earlier, just throwing him to the fire. It was Donovan. Throwing him to the fire a little bit. That probably was the case with Nick DeLoach a little bit last season, and he had a lot of positives, but he obviously made his fair share of mistakes as well. But that was his first season playing. He was a redshirt freshman. So, was not very experienced at all. So this might be a good go around where he'll be able to be a little more refined, I guess, and he's not going to have I mean, I don't want to say he's not going to have as much opportunity as he did last season because can't make that prediction, but might be a little bit of a better situation and environment for him where not as much pressure to perform and things like that. So maybe better situation for Deloach.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Drew Quitz has mentioned with both Pride and Deloach having lost their confidence last year. So I definitely think, yeah, I mean, I forget how young Deloach was starting out there last year. I mean, also at defense back, I will say from that first scrimmage, the players that we talked to mentioned all three young defensive backs as standouts from that game. Caleb Flagg, veteran. Well, he's not young, but veteran safety there. And then Jackson Hancock, another safety, former 3-star guy. And then Cameron Keys apparently had a few interceptions. Although I will say the realization I'm just coming to that now is the fact that the only players we get to ask about this are starters. And so maybe they're they're only paying attention to that stuff and like thinking of who's standing out when they're not playing and watching the twos. But there's that at least. I mean, Jackson Hancock, we know he had a takeaway in that game. He had a takeaway earlier the week in practice. So he's got that going for him. Definitely a long depth chart ahead of him, though. And then to round it out, Mizzou made a hire on Friday, hiring really sorry that I'm going to mispronounce this first name, Gaurav Verma as the director of football strategy and finance. Now, Drinkwitz made it clear today when I asked him about it that this is not a general manager, and he said because he's not over Drinkwitz, he's not going to be able to fire him. I think the biggest difference to point out is that he's not negotiating with agents, and he's not. Though he might recommend, might have some thoughts on who they should acquire. He's not the head man in the scouting department telling them what guys they could recruit. I think the way he could help out in talent acquisition though is saying like, hey, like if you sign this guy for this much, I'm just telling you, you won't be able to do X, Y, and Z then going forward. Because that's what Drinkwitz mentioned, and this was an interesting thing that I'd be interested to learn more about of just determining a player's value, because I've thought about this before with college football because there is no standard, and I'd imagine the teams know what other teams are offering for the most part. But also, like, again, there is no standard, especially with a new salary cap and the fact that the playing field has been so uneven over the past few years. Like, how do you know? I mean, one, if you're a player out there, but then also for schools, like, how do you know what is a fair deal? Like, how do you know you are not completely overspending or are going to, or maybe like this guy's agent is really trying to get you to up the price? Because like there is no standard, there is no average to be able to point to and look at, unlike an NFL team where it's like, you want that much money? Okay, good luck getting that from anybody else. Because I mean, in college, they might say that, and they might like a player might find some team that's going to overpay. So we mentioned like determining value for that. I would imagine that's there's going to be some sort of calculation he comes up with of like, okay, this guy produces this much value for us, produces this much on the field, produces this much for marketing, and so we should pay him X% of our cap. So it's an interesting role. Again, not a general manager, but Verma, really interesting background for it too. Career in finance, graduate of MIT Business School, worked last year as the Denver Broncos as a salary cap specialist assistant. He had a year where he was freelancing and doing work on Substack, talking about like the business of the NFL. Very interesting. So I didn't have the time to read any of it, but just glancing through what he's wrote, I would recommend taking a look at it because there's some interesting stuff he has going on there. So excited to see how he ends up helping out this team. Any thoughts on that hire, Michael?
It was interesting to learn that what was he, a salary cap for the Denver Broncos? What was the
A
price?
salary cap assistant or specialist, something
Yeah,
like that.
I mean, interesting. I think Googling that role in itself is also interesting because it's not really a player acquisition thing, but it's uh, taking a look at what money you're giving to players and how it's going to work out in the future. I think, again, not a general manager. I think everyone needs to make that very clear. Um, but a similar thing where it's something that Eli Drinkwitz. It's a whole bunch of complex stuff that Eli Drinkwitz doesn't have to work on. It's the same thing with Tim Fuller and Dennis Gates, and it's this big, complicated bubble of confusing mess that's been added to college sports that most college coaches probably didn't sign up for. And now he doesn't have to worry about it. He can go find guys and not have to worry about the payment process. It's a really interesting role, and when you read the job description that the university released, you could tell it's not a general manager, which I honestly think it's kind of cool. I mean, Eli Drinkwitz said he didn't want a general manager, so I guess that's kind of interesting in itself. But it's definitely a different position. It's differentiated, which I think is interesting. But yeah, it's kind of the same thing as like what he did as a salary cap uh, specialist or whatever it was kind of my takeaway. It's they're going to figure out who gets what, finding value in these guys, but also this is a second year player. Uh, Give this guy this much money for this year, but what's that going to look like in 2 years? Do we have to change that? Well, how much money are we going to have in 2 years? Things like that. So it's honestly really, really, really intriguing, and I think it's. I mean, I don't want to sound too opinionated because we still don't know much yet, but it seems like a really smart decision. Because you almost wonder for some of these football programs, and I guess same thing for uh, Tim Fuller and just general managing these college programs in general. It's like, is it too much power and overstep in an organization? And I'm not saying it is or is it. Um, Kind of too early to tell, but it's pretty clear Eli Drinkwitz wants as much control over player acquisition and recruiting as he can, which is normal. So having someone just to assist him with more of the technical stuff behind it, really, really interesting move and really interesting position, and seems like an interesting guy.
Right. Yeah. And that, again, that was the main thing kind of Drinkwitz was emphasizing of the power structure, basically. And he had mentioned, like you said, in April, he was asked, like, would you be interested in hiring a general manager? And he didn't flat out shut down the idea, but he's like, well, let's see, let's adjust to his roles. Let's see what this new, what a revenue sharing college athletics looks like. And then I'll decide. And it seems like this was kind of his, not his meet in the middle, but just kind of more specific to what he was looking for and what he was looking for help for. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, very interesting role. Not a general manager, but I would say fits into the same bucket as far as a role that would not exist without the recent changes that have happened to the college athletics in the last 5 years. So yeah, again, just I'd be interested in learning about the internal communications programs have with each other, just how much they know about the rest of the money that us on the outside are just completely not privy to, because I think to a certain extent they have to know a good value, like a standardized value for certain players. So interested to see again just how to hear more on how Verma ends up helping Missouri out. But that's going to wrap out this episode of the All Things Mizzou podcast. We are heading into the final week of fall camp availability. By Monday, the 18th, Missouri will have named its captains. I was going to say they might have a starting quarterback name by then, but I mean, I guess good question it off on the short. Like, I mean, do you think Missouri will have a starting quarterback name by August 18th, then of fall camp?
Um, oh, that's a hard question. I actually really think it's possible. I don't know what goes in. It's called execution week, I believe, this coming week, and I don't fully know what goes into that, but it seems like it's the time where they start hammering out maybe the playbook and just finding consistency. and everything like that. And this seems like a week. It's going to be a week where we find out who makes the best decisions, who doesn't turn the ball over, and who can string those plays together. So it seems like this could be one where maybe at the end of the week we see someone rise to the top, but I feel like we don't know at this point. I mean, we're 2 weeks in, and if there's still no separation, and if we're still hearing the same thing in the middle of the week, then it's probably unlikely. But I'll be optimistic, and I'll say
Yeah.
yes.
I truly I think it's so hard to say, um just because like we have no idea what's going to actually go down in these practices, and we don't know, even though there has been no separation, like what either of them is really working with, what type of momentum either of them has. um but I truly think it's going to go into week one of the season, and I'll be interested. I was thinking about this earlier today, and if it ends up going into week one, I'd ask Drinkwitz this of like, are you going to split it up by half or split it up, like give each of them a few series? Because I know in 2023, I still think to go into week one and say that you were undecided at quarterback and have Brady Cook get over 20 pass attempts and Sam Horn 6, all in short yardage situations, like I I just think I I couldn't get on board with that. So I think if you truly are undecided, I think the best way to find out would be to give each of them a few series. Obviously, the thing going against you there is the fact that you can't like see them like like there's not going to be any other game where they're only playing 3 or 4 drives at a time compared to like just let them play a half and see what they can string together. But I'd be interested to see how that would shake out. I would say I was just interested. I was looking up if Brady Cook was named a captain in 2023, and he was. So I might look at. I'm interested in when they named him a captain, because usually it's like 2 weeks before the season starts.
Yeah,
So
not sure.
yeah, that'd be interesting to see what they do then for captains, because they're supposed to announce them again before the 18th. Maybe they would just leave one spot open for that quarterback, I guess, or just not name one.
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing. Like, it's not a concern right now that there isn't a starting quarterback, and it shouldn't be a concern if there's still not one named heading into Central Arkansas. But I think it would be concerning if there is not one named uh, heading into week 2 against Kansas. And like, it's not, I'm not like pinning anything on the coaches. It's obviously between Sam and Bo. If they haven't done enough, if one of them hasn't done enough to separate, from the other by week 2, that would be a serious problem, because that's, I mean, really when the season starts, Eli Drinkwitz will probably say that they're good. Central Arkansas has, tough things about them, but we all know how that's going to go. Um, but you have to be ready for Kansas. Not take the rivalry out of the equation. I mean, they're going to be a decent football team, and they have you know Power 5 level athletes on their team. So you have to be ready to go win that football game, rivalry or not. I think that is when concern should start to grow, as if there's not a clear separated player by then.
Right. Yeah, and I'd be interested how Drinkwitz would handle that situation. I think no matter what, though, I think they would have one named by that, at least, just for all that you mentioned. But Drinkwitz said at least like there wouldn't be concern, because even some people have pointed out, like, is it going to be too much pressure and too quick of a time and too quick of a turnaround if you don't name one until Thursday night, right after the Central Arkansas game, and then give them, what is that, just over 7 days, 8-9 days to prepare for the Kansas game with the mindset of being a starter. Drinkwitz said he's not really concerned about that possible impact if it does have to go into week one. So we'll have to see there. But again, for the point that brought us to this conversation, fall camp wraps up in this upcoming week, August 18th. We hear from Coach Drinkwitz, a few players, captain, one more time to wrap it all up. And then we'll head into Central Arkansas preparation. So looking forward to all of it. We'll have coverage throughout all at Missouri Tigers Zone SI. So appreciate you tuning in. Hope you do the same for the rest of our coverage.